Hello, Richard. How you doing, Senator?
Hey,
Great to see
Tom.
you.
So good to see you. You call me Richard or Dick
I
or
did, I did, I
whatever's
did.
best.
Okay, so I'm right across the Long Island Sound right now. I guess due south of Westbrook. So I'm very
That's
close to you.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, you're
yeah.
you're close, but not close enough for me to drop by for dinner.
Well, this is true. And dinner, I'm halfway through dinner. I had to start it early so I can do this and then get back to it so I can get my family fed. So
Well,
I'm
thank
halfway
you.
there. Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
for doing it.
So yeah, of course. So I believe we're starting with a video. Is that correct? Hello, video. Here we go. I can't hear that.
Neither can I.
What can we?
There we go. That was better.
Hello, Senator Blumenthal. My name is Noah Frank. I am a senior at the University of Connecticut. So, my question for you is what can we do in our collaborative efforts to make sure that young people stay engaged and stay involved? We had record turnout during the 2020 election, and 2022 has potential, certainly we hope, to follow up with that in a great way. So, how do we keep those voters engaged during off years?
That's a great question. Uh, but before you answer that question, let's keep that one in mind. I know we were supposed to start with that, but I just want to have I have one question though, because I guess you're probably getting this, quite often, probably from friends, not from colleagues. Uh, you announced that you're running for your third term, and with all dysfunction in Washington, with the country even further apart than we've ever been, um, why are you running? I mean,
I'm running
I got to imagine
because
it's frustrating being a member of Congress right now. I mean, we're seeing gridlock. Why are you running?
you're absolutely right, Tom. First of all, one reason I'm running is because of really extraordinary people like you who are engaged as never before. Or, Frank, would you just heard him ask the key question? uh, how do we engage people? I regard myself as engaged and doing what other people are doing, just in a different way, trying to mobilize opinion, create more awareness, and push the ball down the field. And I grant you that it is frustrating. Trust me, it is frustrating beyond my words, at least, many times. And last week was one of the most frustrating with the
Hmm.
voting rights bill going down and the filibuster unreformed. But, I go to work every day with hope that I can get some stuff done. I think we will reform the filibuster. The only question is when. I think we have a chance to protect voting rights. We did do a major infrastructure program. We can do a child care program that would be historic for our nation, as well as other measures that are part of the Build Back Better program. I could go down the list. For me, as a former state attorney general and federal prosecutor, the rule of law is really important. And I fought our previous president, whom I'm happy to name, but why spoil this wonderful hour?
Right, exactly, exactly.
Fought
Right.
him when he tried to defy the rule of law, and I think we made a difference there. So I think it's possible to make a difference, especially if I continue talking and listening and reaching out to those Democrats at UConn who are part of this call. I thank you so much, UConn, and at Yale and at universities and at high schools too, because they'll be taking over, and they need to know that there were people of our generation who never gave up.
That's perfect, and then you'll see why in a second. So let's get to that first question. How do we keep young people engaged?
I reach out, and I would like to follow up with everybody on this call who is interested. I'll give you my cell phone number, 202 641 0532. And Noah, I'm going to need you. You may think this is an off year. For me, it's not an off year. I'm up this November, and I am running for my third term. I want to continue the work that I've started. For example, holding big tech accountable when it drives destructive content using algorithms, and making sure that it's accountable, that there's competition, that it doesn't use the app stores to exclude innovation. I want to continue protecting against the COVID scams that are out there. I've introduced more measures to enable more people to have access to therapeutics as well as tests and vaccines. Just some examples here of how I think we can make a difference. But I would continue to engage people simply by visiting with them, enlisting them in the work that we're doing, helping on our staff, helping as volunteers in our Hartford office down in DC. We have interns who do incredible work. But I will tell you, Tom, that this is one of the most important things I do. And I'll just tell you a little vignette. I worked for Senator Abe Ribicoff as his administrative assistant. I went to him one day and I said, Senator Ribicoff, what do you think is the most important thing that you've done as a senator? I expected him to talk about some of the bills or the great speeches or whatever. He said, the most important thing I do is to engage young people like you. At that point, I was not much older than Noah is now. And that has always stuck with me.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned high school. This is something that I started thinking about recently, and maybe because I remember this from watching The West Wing. There was an episode that I kind of remember where the question was put out there: should we lower the voting age? And you brought up high school students, and you're right. It's really the high school students and the younger people in this country that we want to keep active. That we kind of really messed up the planet for them. And there's so many of us trying to make the planet better. But why should younger people have that vote? We went from having a country that only landowners could vote, and then only included men and black men, and then finally women. We lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. Why shouldn't we lower it again to 16, say, or 15?
Well, 15, I don't know. I agree. We ought to look at it. But in the meantime, young people can actually impact votes by making phone calls, by knocking on doors. I can't tell you how important that work is in my upcoming campaign. I need an army of people that can reach out, because the old ways of reaching people really don't work as effectively anymore. And it's still face-to-face, person-to-person that really matters. And young people, I hesitate to talk about young people,
Right.
people who have the energy, whatever their age. And I agree, we ought to be looking at expanding the franchise and making sure that there is access to the ballot box, and that we have longer hours and better absentee balloting rules, and that the vote count is done accurately and honestly.
Yeah. Well, at least we're not telling the young people to get off the lawn. We actually want them to come on the lawn and pound in some lawn signs and get out there and knock on doors. It's always great. I remember last election in my neighborhood out here in Long Island, where you saw kids with their parents who were out campaigning and knocking on doors. And we have friends that have kids that are 17, 18, and they're very active. And so I think it's really important to get people active. Also, I think it's really important that we start teaching ethics, and we start teaching I'm drawing a blank here.
Civics.
Civics. Thank you. Civics again, because too many people they don't understand how a bill is made. I mean, talk about the last president didn't understand that either, but just really understanding how government works and how government really is working for people. And so getting back to those, I think that is a way of engaging young people, getting them at a young age and letting them understand the importance of government. This really is something that my wife and I often have dinner conversations with our children about the importance of government. And for me, it came into focus when my wife made the film A Place at the Table that was about hunger in this country. And very quickly, we realized that the way to end hunger in this country is really through a government solution. And but for the last since the 80s, we've been spoon-fed that government's bad and government can't do anything. And so I think it's a time to really teach young people that government actually gets a lot done. So let's talk about voting rights.
Let me just interrupt you, Tom, to
Sure.
say young people ought to be teaching us civics. you
Okay.
know, and I don't mean any disrespect to my generation or any other generation, but young people come at this enterprise with a fresh outlook and a energy and relentless hope, you know, that is so critical. The audacity of hope, as President
Hmm.
Obama wrote.
Sure.
And on this issue of the power of government, food insecurity, you've done so much on this issue, Tom. I really thank you. But I went to the food bank lines for the last 2 years on Thanksgiving Eve, for example, lines of cars waiting to pick up basics. People who'd never asked for anything from anyone before. The government was, in effect, keeping people alive by aiding with basics, and
Hmm.
uh, people were hurting, and they still are, because
Yeah.
Americans are still hungry and food insecure. So that's a
Yeah.
great
And
topic.
yeah, and I think an outcome of that, because you're right, the lines that we saw were from people who never thought in a million years that they would need help. But I think the outcome of that is that's my dog. I'm sorry. I think she wants to go out. Um, I'm not in the studio. I'm home, so I have kids and dogs, and you'll hear them from time to time. I'm really thinking that when it comes time to the farm bill is coming up soon, and this is where all the hunger initiatives are sort of embedded in the farm bill. And I'm hoping when that's debated, I think that there can be a greater sense of empathy for people that are struggling now that people who didn't think they would be found themselves in that same position and are realizing that it's not. It didn't happen because people were lazy, and didn't happen because people were trying to work the system. It happened because people were out of work for no fault of their own. And so I'm hoping that maybe we'll have a greater sense of empathy when it comes to those entitlements that really provides just basic you know help for people who are struggling. But
Amen.
obviously, without people getting out to vote, uh, uh, that's going to be an issue. So how do we make sure? So just also, I have a list of questions from people who are asking questions, and some of them I may actually assign a name to them, the person who actually asked. Most of them we're probably addressing as we have our conversation. But there's clearly a lot of concern about voting rights, protection of voter rights, especially with minorities. Um, and listen, we are seeing in states, um, laws that are being enacted where a state could change the electors and just put in their own slate of electors, which is what the last president tried to do to win this election. And they're encoding this in law. And so, how does the federal government push back on this? And what do we think we're going to see out of the federal government to address some of these issues?
Tom, of all the nightmares that
Yeah.
keep me up at night, that's the one that is most frightening. The idea that, frankly, I don't want to be too partisan here, but it's mainly Republicans under Trump, but anyone would mess with the results, would undermine the vote count. We talk mostly about access to the ballot box,
Right.
polling hours, absentee ballot rules, mail-in, numbers of drop boxes, water and food when people are on lines. That's all leading to the vote. But what about the vote count? What
Hmm.
President Trump tried to do in Georgia, what the Pennsylvania legislature tried to do, what the county officials in Arizona sought to impose, in effect, corrupting the vote count. And there is a bill, it's called the Electoral Count Act, which applies at the federal level in presidential election. And that's the kind of rule setting and, and guardrails that we need. We're going to take another crack at voting rights. We're going to keep fighting.
Right.
As everybody on this call knows, we didn't succeed. We had enough votes for it, 51
Hmm.
votes,
Hmm.
if it were a majority vote, but it's not. And we
Right.
lost a couple of colleagues on the filibuster. I have been
Hmm.
in favor of abolishing the filibuster since I first came to the Senate. I think I voted to abolish the filibuster on my third vote in the United States Senate. I was one of only 12. And what I've seen over these past years is that one by one, my colleagues have come around to the point of view that we need to modify the filibuster. And what we proposed was a talking filibuster. We need the Mr. Smith comes to Washington type of filibuster to
Exactly.
achieve voting protection. And we're going to keep fighting for it.
Right. I mean, what really bugs me is the hypocrisy. When if it comes to Supreme Court justice, yeah, 51 votes, abolish the filibuster for that, right?
Yep,
We saw Mitch McConnell
exactly.
successfully do that. When it comes to passing a budget, we can do that, but we can't do it for our most basic right, which is really frustrating. Um, do you see this happening incrementally? Do you see a talking filibuster? Is that the plan to try to incrementally, go back to a talking filibuster before we finally do away with it? And then follow-up question also would be, any concern at all that if we're not in leadership in a leadership role in the Senate, that abolishing the filibuster will come back to down the road. It will be helpful if you're in if and one day we will be in the minority again. It just happens. Hopefully not in our lifetime, but it will happen. Um, so any concerns about that?
I'm concerned about both. I would say the chances are very, very good that Republicans will modify the filibuster in the ways that they say that shouldn't be done now. Mitch McConnell's agenda is very simply to take back the majority and to keep it and do anything that is necessary to hold the majority. So I would say that is a very, very troubling prospect because they did it for Supreme Court justices, as you've just said.
Yeah.
You know, the point is there's been so much hypocrisy around the filibuster. The Republicans have misused it and abused it. When I voted to abolish it, my colleagues, many of them Democrats, said to me, "Oh, you'll be sorry if the filibuster is abolished because you'll want to use it." And I did support votes against, for example, restricting reproductive freedoms. So Democrats have used it, but nowhere near as often as Republicans. And I am afraid that they will abolish the filibuster and just ram through their own restrictive legislation.
Yeah. So while we're on that, the topic of whether or not they'll take the Senate back, uh, I mean, a little chalk talk on what our prospects are for keeping it. I know Tim Ryan seems to be looks like he'll probably be running in Ohio. He'll get the nomination. Um, Tim is a good friend, I think he has a great chance of taking Portman's seat. I think Fetterman looks like John Fetterman, who's the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, might also be running as well. I think he has a great chance. Dr. Oz is on the other side. Dr. Oz is getting all the press, but he doesn't seem to be getting any votes right now. And I think the other two are real, sort of Trump supporters. Those are two. I mean, where do you see us losing? What seats are you concerned about? What seats do you think we can pick up?
Great question, Tom. I am very, very hopeful. I never say confident or optimistic. I always say hopeful. And in my own race, I always run like I'm 10 points behind. I always consider myself the underdog, even in a state like Connecticut, but there are tougher states like Arizona for Mark Kelly, Georgia, Raphael Warnock, New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan. Those states are where we have incumbents who may have tough races, along with Catherine Masso in Nevada.
Yeah.
And what we need to do in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, where we have openings, is redouble our efforts. North Carolina, those seats are open, and they provide opportunities.
Right. Yeah, it looked like we had an opportunity with Johnson, maybe not running, but in Wisconsin, but it seems like he is. But hopefully we can do some good work there as well. Because that's what we need to take back.
I think he is very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think he's very vulnerable.
I believe he is.
We're going to have strong candidates. And I think in every one of these states where there are open seats, we're going to have strong candidates.
Okay. Let's move to Build Back Better. A lot of questions, especially around the child tax credit. Um, People wanting to know whether or not that could be made permanent. Uh, Tanya from Escondido says it's well, actually, she had another one. She was asking about pre-K. Well, several people talking about how it's really helping their family and whether or not we can make that permanent. Uh, so, do you want to take that one?
I am a strong supporter of making permanent the child tax credit. You know, it is the biggest single middle class tax cut. It's a tax cut in a generation, maybe in recent history. It has lifted countless kids out of poverty, literally millions. I think that one of the estimates is 40% of all kids in poverty or more. And I think it is one of the main candidates we should have to include in the Build Back Better program, even if it is scaled back.
Right. So this you just said something there. I was kind of laughing because I think Democrats always do a lousy job at this. We call it the child tax credit. Why don't we call it the child tax cut? And I want to see Republicans vote against the child tax cut because they seem to want to cut taxes all the time. We could just rebrand this, and I'd love to see them. I would love to see them vote against the tax cut.
I know there are a lot of people on this call, Tom, who would like to ask, and maybe they will ask in the course of the program, why aren't you guys better at messaging? You know,
Exactly.
the Republicans can put it on a bumper sticker.
Yep.
Why can't you guys do better? And, you know, we are so policy oriented. We're wonks and nerds. We are
Right.
so intent on doing the right thing, but we're in a real fight right now. It's about the future of our democracy.
Sure.
And by the way, somebody like Catherine Cortez Masto, whom I mentioned earlier as having a tough race, she isn't mentioned a lot, but we should recognize that everyone is going to have a tough race. The Republicans are going to throw millions upon millions into every one of these races, including my own. Every one of us who's up this time is at risk. And I'm reminded of the old saying, there are two ways to run, either scared or unopposed. And
Right.
that's the way we have to regard these races. But you're right that the child tax credit, it's a tax cut.
So there was a question about pre-K programs available nationally. I know. I guess that's a state-by-state program. Is there? Do you think there's some support to make universal pre-K national? That comes from Tanya at Escondido, California.
Tanya, absolutely yes. I think if
While
there
you're
is
answering this question, I'm going to let the dog out. I'll be right back.
uh, I'm really kind of a little bit insulted that the dog didn't want to listen to me, but I guess you know at least.
She can't. She can't because I'm using an ear set, so I'm the only one in the house
Oh,
hearing you. But otherwise, I'm sure
well,
she would love to sit here and chat all night.
what's your dog's name?
Her name is her name is actually her name is Tikva. We
Okay,
call her Tiki, but Tikva is Hebrew for hope, and
I
so we
know,
got her
I
during the
know.
pandemic. Yeah, so we got her
Yeah,
during the pandemic. So yeah, so that's why we named her
wonderful.
Tikva.
Well, here's the answer. Going back to human beings, yes, universal pre-K, absolutely, and childcare. You know, Tom, I have been visiting childcare facilities and centers all around the state of Connecticut. There was a survey done recently. 62% of all childcare centers are not breaking even. That is unsustainable. We need to do a massive program to support childcare and universal pre-K for every child. But it's childcare, not just universal pre-K, because we need to
Right.
cover the pre-K
Sure.
kids.
Sure.
And it's so important
Right.
to enable moms and dads to go back to work. So it's great for our economy, essential for our economic recovery and filling jobs, enabling people to go back to the workforce. We have more jobs than we have unemployed people. How does that happen? Well, people have to stay home to take care of their kids, which they wouldn't
Right.
have to do with childcare. So yes, universal pre-K is important for the future of our workforce and for our economy long term. Childcare is important right now.
Right. In my industry, they would love to see childcare extended to the evening as well, because
Right.
in a restaurant, the restaurant business where so many people are working at nighttime, they're left out of childcare completely. And a lot of people have to drop out of the industry because they can't get childcare at night. The cost of having a babysitter watch their child is just too expensive for them to afford. And so that's something I know in New York we're trying to get something done where
Yeah.
it can be included for the evening as well. Um, let's uh, let's move to infrastructure bill. That's one thing we did get done. We passed a huge infrastructure project, and so there's questions about how is that money going to be used in Connecticut.
It'll be used in Connecticut in much the same way it'll be used all around the country. For those of you who live in Connecticut, you know the Walk Bridge in Norwalk, you know the Connecticut River Bridge. For rail and passenger cars, you know that many of our bridges are basically degrading, and some of them are actually deemed unsafe. Roads which have potholes, we can't compete on a global scale when we have roads with potholes, when we have rail that is slower now from New Haven to New York than it was 50 years ago. We're going to have major upgrades to our rail. We're going to have more broadband. You think in Connecticut, well, everybody's connected. Think again,
Mhm.
because a lot of kids had to go to hotspots, whether, McDonald's or wherever, so they could do their homework during the pandemic. That
Mhm.
connectivity is tremendously important. So roads, rail, bridges, ports. I was just this morning at the Milford Harbor where there's going to be dredging. So people can get into the harbor for recreation, for boating.
Mhm.
And it's an economic driver, a job creator, because restaurants in the area, hotels, jobs created by the construction, all very important economically. So, in effect, making sure that we upgrade our roads, bridges, rail, ports, airports, broadband. But now we have to turn to investing in the people that are going to use all that infrastructure.
Mhm.
That's where daycare, universal pre-K, and yes, climate change. We need to do so much more with climate change, investing in electric outlets for electric vehicles, which the
Mhm.
infrastructure does program does to some extent, but we need to do more. Climate change that provides more of the kinds of aid for the environmental
Sure.
challenges that we face. It's big, it's complex, but we need to invest. That's the key word, invest.
Yeah, and I also think that this is going to take a series of investments as well, because uh, you know if we were to move tomorrow all cars to electric, our electric grid couldn't support that. And so um, there's a lot of upgrades that we need to see. High speed rail is something. There's a couple questions about high speed rail and how important that is, especially when you have smaller cities that are struggling to compete because you can't get people to them. So high speed rail, especially connecting, you know, small cities in Connecticut to New York City or Boston, a high speed rail. Currently, I think it takes 2 hours from New London to get to Boston. Um, uh, that could be cut down to 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Also connecting, large, let's say medium cities all through the Midwest. Um, and it'll keep those cities really sort of vibrant, but also keep the communities outside as well really vibrant. So it's, I hope that this is just the first in a long series of investments that we're making in the country, because that's what we're really
I
talking
agree.
about here. It's
I
about
agree
it's about
totally.
investing in our country. Yeah. Um,
Investing
and
in
this is
our
also,
country and
yeah.
making the United States a 21st century world power. We invest a lot. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I'm also on the
Hmm.
Judiciary Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. And we know we're spending a ton of money on our military defense.
Hmm.
But
I think it was what,
our power,
$780 billion? Was that the number? 780 billion? Something?
780 billion on that order,
Yeah,
and
something. Yeah,
we're going to spend uh, more than $1 trillion on infrastructure, but that's over a period of years. So, Stamford, Connecticut, my hometown here in Connecticut, used to be a commuter town, commuting
right.
into New York. Well, now more people commute into Stamford. Most of them drive. If
Hmm.
we increase the speed, reliability, safety, comfort of rail, they would be on rail. And we get cars
Right.
off the road. We would diminish pollution and the wear and tear on our roads and on our cars. People pay 711, approximately 711 on average per year to repair and maintain their cars because of the bad roads that we have, the potholes
Sure. I
that
blew out two tires on the Long Island Expressway, just last year. Just completely blew them out.
yeah.
So yes, yes, I know. Absolutely. Yeah. Hmm. Let me now. Every dog that goes out needs to come back in. So let me just let her back in, and then we'll pick up again. Hold on one second.
Well, while you're out, I'm going to do some filibustering and
Okay.
just say that the way we can get these measures passed to invest in people is for, again, folks to write to members of the United States Congress, to email, to call, to text, where you have the numbers, and to their staffs, and to go to their offices, because it really has an impact. Go back to the very first question: how do we engage people of all ages, young people particularly, on the issues, particularly on climate change, environment, as well as basic voting rights and the rule of law?
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand, that that is one of the most effective things that every citizen in this country can do, and yet everyone is so reluctant to do that. Um, I was going to save this for later, but it's a good pivot right now. Um, and you took my phone call right away when I called you about a year ago in support of what we called at the time the Restaurant Act. It turned to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund.
Right.
And when COVID hit and restaurants were shuttered, very quickly a group of chefs and restaurateurs came across the country. I was one of the founding members of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and trying to figure out what we could do. And we very, very quickly, um, it's a dirty word in politics, but we hired lobbyists, to lobby on our behalf, but and a comms team, and that clearly paved the road. But what really helped is when we had thousands of chefs and restaurateurs and restaurant workers across the country call, and we made it very easy. We had a tool on our website where you could go in, put in your area code, and the number popped up, and also a little paragraph on what to say, and we just inundated offices with our message about saving restaurants, and it worked. The bill was passed, and it was bipartisan, and we got support from well over 60 senators, and we received funding. Now we're also, the funding wasn't enough. Of the over 300,000 restaurants that applied for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, only about 1/3 were actually granted grants, and so we're going back for a next bite of the apple. And again, we're flooding with phone calls. So that works. If you're listening and there's something you care about, and the next topic is, I think, something that so many of us care about. This is where you really need to pick up the phones. But I do have to say that, and want to thank you personally, because I know not only did you pick up the phone and talk to me about it, but you really advocated for it, and it really it helped so many people in our industry. There's 15 million workers in our industry, and when I say our industry, I'm not including fast food and large chains. I'm only including independent restaurants. And when you factor in fishermen and farmers and cheesemakers and the guy who fixes our plumbing and our stoves, and it's probably about 20 million people. And so many people were directly affected by that simple vote that just really helped so many restaurants. So I want to personally thank you for that. Um,
Well, thank you for your
and
advocacy, Tom. And
Thanks.
I just want to say a word. You know, the economic recovery has been truly impressive. Part of the reason why we have inflation right now, and we need to tame and stop inflation,
Hmm.
is that the recovery was so robust, but it was uneven.
Yeah.
And restaurants still, many of them are struggling. Not all, but that is why we need to replenish the
Yes.
restaurant revitalization fund. And you can take it from me, and I pledge to you, the bipartisan group that advocated it the first time around, and then the first replenishment, we're going to go after it again. And I spoke to Ben Cardin
Hmm.
today.
Yep.
Uh, Senator Cardin of Maryland is the head of the
Head of the
Small
SBA.
Business Committee,
Hmm.
and we are going to push in the next couple of months to replenish that fund. Because as I go around our state, I listen to restaurant owners, but I also listen to the servers, to the chefs, to, as you say, the guys who do maintenance. And this industry is still hurting in many parts of our state and our country because people need to feel safe to go back to normal. And that's why I've also been pressing for more tests, because people will feel safe if they know that the person coming to the restaurant or the person serving them or the chef has been tested that very day.
Hmm.
And I think that sense of security will help us
Yep.
continue to open the economy and enable people to come back to work.
All right. Well, thank you. And before we put that to bed, though, I do want to um, two things. Senator Cardin, I would love to actually see the text on that bill. He keeps telling us he wants 60 senators before we get it. I think we'd actually get the next. I think we actually have 58 that are on board right now, and so we're close. The other
Right.
I do want to point out, and just so this is not completely partisan, Roger Wicker, senator from Mississippi, was so instrumental in getting this done. He wrote the bill in the Senate. He wrote it before we took the Senate back in that election in Georgia, and he's been a great advocate. And so I did want to give a shout out to Senator Wicker for the work that he's done on this as well as
It's
yourself
been a
and Senator
bipartisan
Cardin.
effort.
Yeah, it
It
really
has
has been.
really been a
Yeah.
bipartisan effort. Roger Wicker is a good friend of mine. We sit together on a couple of committees, Armed Services and the Commerce Committee. We just went to Ukraine together.
Oh.
He and Senator Portman of Ohio
Hmm.
and uh, four Democrats, Senator Shaheen of New Hampshire, Senator Murphy also of
Connecticut. You're
Connecticut,
the junior senator from Connecticut.
right, and Senator Kramer, who's a Republican of North Dakota. Um, and we do work together in a bipartisan way. The infrastructure program, as
Yeah.
you pointed out, was bipartisan. The restaurant revitalization fund
Yeah.
is bipartisan.
This is something that I hear. I mean, I used to spend and I still get to DC every now and then. Since COVID, I haven't been as much, but I used to spend a lot of time there. I was a co-founder of an organization called Food Policy Action. We actually graded Congress on how they voted on various food and farming issues and fishing. So I spent a lot of time on the Hill. And the one thing that I've heard over and over again is that behind closed doors, there's it's not what everybody sees in the news, that there are people who do get along and work together. And it sounds like from listening to you now that it does happen. But unfortunately, with the news cycle the way it is, and with cable news, everyone just wants to get there, and it almost is if they're not bashing someone on the other side, they're afraid they're not going to get reelected. Um, but it sounds to me like there's a lot more that happens behind closed doors than we know about.
There's a lot of interaction that people don't see, and there's a lot of polarization that occurs
Hmm.
because of the campaign finance laws that require
Hmm.
such huge amounts of money that has to be raised, and because, as you pointed out, some of the I don't mean to single out cable, but some of the media and maybe the public finds that conflict is more interesting than cooperation. You know, people are more likely to stop on a street corner if there's a fight than if there's two people talking genially. And that's just human nature.
Sure.
There's more
Sure.
attention to it. But
Yeah.
I do think that we need to work together more.
All right. So the one issue where I think we need to really start making a lot more noise. I'd love to see a lot more noise be made on college campus. about climate change? I know there's a lot of people acting up around it, but it's starting to get really difficult out there. We're almost past the point of no return. There were a lot of questions about climate change and what is happening in the Senate. Can anything happen? Can we push anything through? What can be done?
What can be done? And I know this is going to seem like a digression. One thing that can be done is we need more disclosure on campaign contributions.
Okay.
Dark money.
Mhm.
The energy companies that have an interest in further polluting our air and creating more emissions and distracting you from climate change are spending tons and tons of money, dark money, unreported money, money through vehicles and organizations that are in the dark. So more disclosure, more research. Jane Mayer, who has
I
written
was
for the
just
New
gonna
Yorker.
I was gonna mention her book. Anybody out there who wants to understand what dark money does, pick up Jean Mayer's book. It's a fantastic book. Hmm.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
If you have to read one thing about how our political system works in the modern age, that is a very important place to begin.
Right.
But here's the
And
other
it's
thing. People can
and it starts with the oil companies. It actually goes. That's where it
exactly.
actually starts. The book. Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And some of the oil companies, Exxon, for example, being sued for misrepresentation
Mhm.
because it engaged in deception and misrepresentation. But I really believe that citizen action, student action, environmental action, uh, you know, um, there is a saying um, that uh, a small group of, never doubt that a small group of intelligent and dedicated people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. A small group of people, and it's not my quote,
Mhm.
but um, I think that student action, you mentioned the campuses, is one of the very important ways that we can raise awareness, and I think it is having an effect in this country as well as
Right.
around the world.
Right. So this wasn't one of the questions that I thought we were that I was planning on asking, but you brought it up, and being chair of the Armed Service Committee, and you mentioned that you were in Ukraine. Um, where do you see that going? Do you think Russia will invade, and if they do, what can we do short of an all-out war? I know that uh, the president is putting together a lot of economic incentives to prevent Putin from crossing over. Do you think that's the extent of it? I know we're some of our allies, our NATO allies, are moving either troops or equipment, and some of the other countries that border Ukraine. Do you think that's enough of a deterrent, or do you think he will actually cross over?
That is the question of the moment, Tom. I
Yeah.
visited Ukraine we were on the ground for about 24 hours, and we met with all of the top leadership, the president, defense minister, foreign minister, interior minister, a lot of others, uh, Ukrainian people. And here was my main takeaway. The Ukrainians are absolutely determined, resolute to fight for their country. Putin is going to be in a world of hurt if he invades because he will be met with citizen resistance. And I'm not sure that Putin has been well advised on that
Hmm.
fact. He's going to encounter costs and consequences that he may be ignoring. Point number one, we need to do stuff right now before the invasion to deter it.
Right.
I'm not talking about American troops. I'm talking about economic sanctions beginning now, disconnecting Russia from the world finance system, the so-called SWIFT system, imposing export controls, exposing Putin's assets hidden around the world, personal assets. And then in terms of arms, the Ukrainians need to be provided with the means to defend themselves, whether it's Stinger missiles or Javelin missiles that take on the airplanes and the tanks that the Russians may throw at them, and small arms that they may need for an insurgent operation. And the model here would be Afghanistan, not our
Sure.
Afghanistan, but
No, I
Russia's
get. Well,
Afghanistan.
we made the same. We made
And
kind of the same mistake in following them, but yes, I
exactly.
agreed.
So
Yep.
my hope is that we can deter him. I really hope we
Hmm.
can. I hope that he recognizes what the cost will be. But it's potentially the biggest assault on the world order in
Hmm.
our history since World War II, because what
Now,
he's doing is invading another country.
right. And now, is this in response to the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, or is just Putin flexing his muscles and trying to stay relevant?
Putin has a playbook. His playbook is to divide, destabilize, demoralize democracies. He did it in our country in 2016 with misinformation. He
Hmm.
tried to do it in France and UK in their elections. He's tried to do it in Eastern European countries. He wants to divide us. That's one of his major tactics. Number two, he wants to bring those Eastern Europe countries that formerly were part of the Soviet Union, he wants to bring them back to Mother Russia. He wants to bring them back into
Right.
his sphere of influence and hegemony, and in effect make them part of the Russian empire that he seeks to restore. And what he'd like to do is have a puppet in Ukraine that does his bidding. He had someone on that
Hmm.
order before the present government took over. And the Ukrainian people absolutely dead set it isn't going to happen, which is why they'll fight him. But that's one of his objectives. So I think he is going to try to continue to put pressure on Ukraine. You know, he's amassing troops in Belarus just north of Kyiv, Ukraine's capital. It's just
Hmm.
a few hours by
Right.
car. And on that border, they're going to be doing exercises in February. The betting is he'll try something. We don't know quite what, but hopefully will deter an invasion.
Got it. Okay, we only have about 10 minutes left, and so there are a couple of things we want to get to, so I'll do it quickly. Obviously, gun violence and gun violence prevention is high on the list of questions. I know this is something that you fight for, uh, predating the tragedy that happened in Connecticut at Sandy Hook. Um, what can we get done? Is this just something that we're going to have to live with? It seems that every other day we're hearing about either a mass shooting. Schools are still targets. What can be done, if
You're
anything?
right, Tom, that I have been working on this issue for
Yeah.
decades, going back to when I first became Attorney General of Connecticut. I championed a measure, and it was passed in our state legislature to ban assault weapons. And fast forward to Sandy Hook, in the wake of that unspeakable tragedy, we came very close to background check reform. And I will never forget the survivors of Sandy Hook, the parents of loved ones who were killed that afternoon in December, shouting, "Shame, shame," from the gallery
Hmm.
when we failed to get the 60 votes we needed. And it is a mission for me. It is frustrating, but there is no way I'm going to give up or go away because I'm inspired by the survivors. Not only the mass shootings, but the drive-by, one by one, the
Right.
killings that occur in our cities, in our communities. No part of Connecticut, no part of the United States is immune from it. And I do believe we can get reform. Here's why. Because we've created a movement, a real political movement,
Hmm.
with grassroots organization. Giffords, started by Gabby Giffords.
Hmm. Sure.
Moms Demand Action, every town.
Every town. Hmm.
And, there is a panoply of organizations that have mobilized the grassroots, and there now is a solid majority in the House. We need to get it through the Senate. Background checks, universal background checks, a red
Hmm.
flag or emergency risk protection order that separates people from guns. If they say they're going to kill people, as the shooter in Parkland did,
Hmm.
they should be separated from that weapon. A court order after a hearing, due process, ought to be issued. Somebody who says he's going to kill himself or others. And of course, safe storage, what I've
Right.
introduced as Ethan's Law, named after Ethan's song in Connecticut,
Sure.
who was killed in his neighbor's home when the child there found a gun owned by his parents, the neighbor's parents, and tragically he was shot.
Yeah.
And Ethan's Law, named after Ethan's song, would require safe storage. Likewise, other common sense safety measures, holding the gun companies accountable, eliminating the act that gives them near complete immunity. I think there are a number of these measures that are very realistic to think we
Right.
can
And
pass, and
do,
it
do
will
you
be an issue in
support?
this next election.
Do you support prosecuting parents who are lapse in making sure guns are safe at home
I
to
think
prevent
parents
a
have to
kid
be
from getting a gun? Yeah.
that parents have to be held accountable. That's the whole
Yeah.
purpose of Ethan's Law.
Got it. Yeah, that happened. It actually happened to a childhood friend of mine when we were about 13. He and another friend were playing in a home. Kid had a gun, thought it wasn't loaded, pointed at him, shot him, killed him. Yeah. So,
And
um,
it people have to live with it for the rest of their lives, not just the parents like Mike and Kristen Song who lost Ethan, but the
mhm.
parents of a child who takes another's life, maybe in play, so-called play, but these tragedies need to be stopped.
All right. Okay, so we're about 6 minutes out. There's questions about student loans. There are some questions, people wanting to know when they're going to get a hockey team back in Connecticut. I don't know if you could do anything about that. Wanting to know whether or not UConn belongs in the Big East or the ACC. Wanting to know why they're putting so much money into football and it's still a lousy football program. I don't know if you can do anything about these at all, but I just wanted to let you know this is what's on people's minds as well. But let's talk about student loans and student education. And there was a question from Josh from Hartford, Connecticut, wanting to know what your stance is on eliminating student debt.
Josh, nothing could be more passionately on my mind than reform of student debt. I've joined with Elizabeth Warren. You're probably familiar with the bills that we've
Mhm.
introduced that would greatly curtail and, for many people, eliminate student debt. It is an overhang on our economy. It inhibits economic growth. It's bad for individuals who make choices skewed to making money rather than creating new businesses or becoming research scientists or doctors because of the impact on their careers and the need to repay student debt. So yes, we need to reform this entire system, not to mention the predatory practices of some institutions that
Right.
put our veterans into debt without degrees and who entice them to enroll in programs so they can take advantage of the GI Bill. The universities or colleges that are engaging in these practices and exploit our veterans. Um, and let me just say, while we're on the topic of athletes, and particularly student athletes, I think we need to treat them more fairly, enable them to take advantage of their name, image, and likeness, but also recognize that many of them uh, have issues of food insecurity and
Sure.
who are kind of hanging on. They come from often uh, underserved backgrounds. And so I think we need to look at the entire system of college athletics to make it fair.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that is that obviously the NCAA now is allowing student athletes to realize some money with their name and likeness. But too often I think we focus on the elite athletes that are
Right.
going to go pro. They're going to make a living. But this also just now will allow a local you know athlete to go and maybe sign autographs at a car dealership for some kind of compensation. So it's not only about commercials and it's about put a deal with Nike, or this, there's a lot of small little things that can happen too, using your name and likeness, especially for any student athlete, not just the superstars. And so,
Right.
and you're right. There's a lot of kids who end up in school, and this is not only for student athletes, but a lot of kids who end up in school. Maybe it's the first generation of someone going to school in a family, and they can't afford a meal program. And
And one
so,
more point on education, Tom, that I think is tremendously important. I don't want to belabor it, but
sure.
we need people educated to become welders, pipe fitters, carpenters.
Absolutely.
I come from a state that produces submarines and helicopters and manufacturing. We need people who can do those jobs, and there's a career in those jobs. And
Yep.
we need to provide the skill training so people can take advantage of those careers and fill the jobs that exist right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We need to see education in trade schools to really start to grow. I mean, that's I skipped over trade school. That's why I planned on going to culinary school, and actually never did. But yeah, there's so many
You're
jobs
the
that
you're the
are
Bill
out there.
Gates. You're the Bill
I got
Gates
lucky.
of culinary.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't go that far, but I did luck out. I was at the right place at the right time, and somehow had a little talent. But listen, we're going to come to an end. There's a lot of questions we didn't get to. There are a lot of questions about healthcare, about mental health issues. We're running out of time, and I do want to let you, in the last 2 minutes, just kind of just give us your summary and your take on the state of play here, and just take us out. So it was a pleasure.
Tom,
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure spending time with you, as always. And hopefully, I'll see you in person one of these days.
I would love nothing more than to be with you in person, either in one of your restaurants or down in DC. You are a strong and vigorous advocate for public interest. And let me just say about healthcare, one of the reasons I'm running for re-election is to cut pharmaceutical drug costs, the price of insulin, the price of other medicines that are increasingly out of reach. We pay more than other industrial countries for our healthcare, particularly pharmaceutical drugs. And that's one of the goals of Build Back Better. And it is one of my major goals, is to increase access to quality healthcare. But I really feel we have so much work as a democracy to do, protecting the rule of law, making sure that we keep our roads and bridges better than they are, and making sure that we invest in the human capital, in the human beings that use those roads and bridges, daycare, childcare, universal PreK, all of the really essential work of our democracy. And I hope to enlist folks who are on this call, because my outreach and my appeal is to the folks at the grassroots. They're the ones, the activists and the advocates, who have always made a difference in the causes that I've espoused. And I really look forward to working for you and having you at my side in this work. And please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, and please give my best to Cynthia.
I will, and thank you, and best to your family, and
Thanks.
Tikva to all of us. Hope.
Thank you. Take care now. Good night.
Take care, Tom.